Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nell Pepper, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard University Division of Science, and the Harvard Library, I am so pleased to introduce this virtual event with HAROLD MCGEE presenting his book, Nosedive, a field guide to the world's smells, in conversation with David Weitz. Thank you so much for joining us virtually tonight. Tonight's event is the latest installment in our Harvard Science Book Talks series, which works to bring the authors of recently published science literature to our Cambridge community and beyond. To learn more about our other upcoming events, you can visit harvard.com and sign up for our email newsletter, or to check out the page, you can check out the page harvard.com/science for the Science Talks schedule. And I'll also be posting a link in the chat to our Science Research Public Lectures YouTube channel, where you can view previous talks that you might have missed. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk tonight, you can click on the Q&A button on your screen, and we will get through as many questions as time allows. This event also will have closed captioning available. Depending on the version of Zoom that you are using, you may need to enable captions yourself by clicking on the closed caption button on your screen. In the chat, I will also be posting a link to purchase copies of Nosedive from harvard.com. Thank you so much for buying your books from Harvard Bookstore. Your support means the world to us and ensures the future of a local independent bookstore. Lastly, as you likely have experienced in virtual gatherings such as these, technical issues may arise. We, of course, hope that they will not, but if they do, we will do our best to resolve them quickly. And I thank you in advance for your patience and understanding. And now I am delighted to introduce our speakers. HAROLD MCGEE studied at Caltech and Yale, and since 1980 has been writing about the science of food and cooking. He is the author of the award-winning book On Food and Cooking, is a visiting lecturer in Harvard University's course Science and Cooking from Haute Cuisine to Soft Matter Science, and is a former columnist for the New York Times. He has been named Food Writer of the Year by Bon Appetit magazine and has been listed in the Time 100, an annual list of the world's most influential people. David Weitz received his PhD in physics from Harvard University and then joined Exxon Research and Engineering Company, where he worked for nearly 18 years. He then became a professor of physics at the University of Pennsylvania and moved to Harvard at the end of the last millennium as professor of physics and applied physics. He leads a group studying soft matter science with a focus on material science, biophysics, and microfluids. He co-developed and co-teaches the popular Harvard Science course, Science and Cooking from Haute Cuisine to Soft Matter Science. They will be discussing HAROLD MCGEE's book, Nosedive, a field guide to the world's smells. It began as a project about the flavors of food and drink, but expanded over the course of a decade to encompass the smells of the material world at large, which flavors often echo. Through the book's extensive exploration of the long overlooked world of smell, McGee familiarizes us with the actual bits of matter that we breathe in, the molecules that trigger our perceptions. Beginning with the origins of those molecules in interstellar space, McGee moves onward through the smells of our planet, the air and the oceans, the forest and the meadows and the city, all the way to the smells of incense, perfume, wine, and food. I am very pleased to turn things over to our speakers. The digital podium is yours, HAROLD.
All right. I think I'm on. Thank you very much, Nell. And it's a real pleasure to be here at the bookstore this evening. I was actually in person there in 2010, the last time, to do a talk with Jody Adams, a wonderful chef in the Boston area. And so it's great to be back even in this form. And I'm very grateful to Dave for joining us. We have been teaching colleagues now for 13 years in the course on the science of food and cooking at Harvard, and it's been a wonderful 13 years, and look forward to many more, and to chatting tonight about something that's a little bit off the beaten track for me, although perhaps not for Dave. Of course, my beat is the science of food and cooking, and that's something I've been writing about since the 1970s. I've always been interested about flavor. In fact, that's probably the aspect of food and drink that drew me in the first place, and kept me writing about it over these decades. It's the pleasure that we get from these materials, which have to do with flavor. In the 1970s and 1980s, we really didn't know that much about flavor, about what it is, particularly in food and drink, that produce these sensations, and then how it is that we as consumers process them and enjoy them. So I always wanted to write about flavor in some detail, but there just weren't details to share until the early 2000s. And it was then that the olfactory receptors and the taste receptors began to be identified and understood and studied, and also the analytical techniques for finding out what it is in foods in tiny quantities that we're registering when we register tastes and smells. That technology had improved greatly, and we were accumulating a lot of information. So it seemed to me in the early 2000s that it was time to maybe write a book about flavor, and that was my initial intention. As I did it, I began to realize that smell in particular was something that was interesting beyond what we experience in food and drink. So flavor is essentially, and I'll simplify, of course, taste and smell. Taste buds on the tongue, smell receptors in the nose. Flavor is a combination of what we experience on the tongue and in the nose as we eat. And taste is a relatively limited sense. There may be a dozen or so different tastes. People still argue about that a little bit. But it's with smell that we get the tremendous diversity of flavors. You know, hundreds of different fruits, hundreds of different herbs and spices, animal foods and grains and fermented foods. They all have such different flavors. And most of that is down to the different aromas they have, the different smells. And then it turns out, the more I looked into that aspect of flavor, the smells of foods and the smells of other things are composites. They're mixtures of molecules, not just single molecules. So the aroma of an apple is actually many different molecules that somehow combine to give us the impression of apples. And it's a different set of molecules that makes us register the presence of a pear. So there's this, first of all, great diversity, then complexity, and then crossing over thanks to that complexity, because these composite aromas can share components with each other. So for example, Parmesan cheese can sometimes, if it's a really good one about a year and a half old, can smell really strikingly like pineapple. Two completely different things, and they share this particular aromatic note. Raw oysters are often celebrated for smelling like cucumbers, and borage, which is a herb, smells like both of them. How does that work? Three completely different things that have such similar aromas. And then the more I looked into this kind of crossover effect, the more I began to register the fact that there are crossovers not just among foods and drinks, but between food and drink and the rest of the world. So some cheeses smell like flowers. Some cheeses smell like the forest floor. Some cheeses smell like sweaty feet. Some green teas smell like the seashore. Some beers, the Belgian beers, they can smell like Band-Aids. Sometimes they smell like a horse stable. When I began to really pay attention to this kind of crossover, I began to realize that, in fact, smell is a really interesting sense, maybe the most interesting sense, because it's our most intimate and most particular and most direct contact with the material world. If you think about, sight and hearing, what we're registering are very indirect indications of what it is that we're perceiving. In the case of smell, and also taste, but smell is where all the particularity is. We're actually detecting individual molecules or small numbers of molecules that are being given off by objects in the material world. And those molecules from those objects in the material world are momentarily becoming part of us as our receptors grab onto them, register their presence, send a signal to the brain, and then let go again. So it's this amazing sense that I had never given proper acknowledgement to, and it just fascinated me, this fact that it is so direct and that it gives us such access to the things around us, invisible, inaudible, but we still know something about the world through this particular sense, and we know things very specifically. So long story short, I decided I wanted to explore that, not just flavor, not just the aromas of foods, but the aromas of the world. And so I gave it a name because it was a fun thing to do. I called the world of smells the osmocosm, osma from a Greek root meaning to smell. And I tried to explore that universe, the universe of smells that we're exposed to on planet Earth, as extensively as possible, in as much detail as possible, and to ask the question, not just what is it that we're smelling, but what does that perception tell us? What could it tell us about the nature of the thing that we're smelling? What's going on to generate these smells? Why do things have these smells? And that's why it took me 10 years to write this book, because I knew food and drink pretty well, but I didn't know all that much about the ocean and the forest and the soil and the world of perfumes and that kind of thing. And so it did take me 10 years to write, but I did eventually write it, and I loved the process of learning about all these things. I should hold up the occasion for this talk, which is the publication late last year of the paperback edition of my book on this subject. And I'll just say that the paperback has a new index. I redid the index for this edition. The index for the hardcover is not what it could have been, and I regret that. But what I've done is put the index, the revised index, online on my website, so that anyone who's bought the hardcover or will buy the hardcover can have access to a much better index. Anyway, that's why I'm here. Took 10 years. And I'll just give you a very brief sketch of what's in it. I started out in college wanting to be an astronomer because I was just fascinated by the night sky, walking out at night and looking up into the universe and wondering, what's going on? Why why does this place exist, and what is my tiny little place in it, and how can I understand what it is that has brought me to this place? So I actually start nosedive with the Big Bang and ask the question, when in the history of the universe, not just planet Earth, but the universe, would we have been able to detect with the noses that we humans have molecules that we would recognize on planet Earth? And it turns out that radio telescopes are able to give us information about molecules out there. And radio astronomers have cataloged what molecules have been found in deep space. And there are updates every couple of years. We now, I think the census is now on the order of 400 or 500 different molecules. And among them are things that we would recognize immediately. For example, hydrogen sulfide, the smell of cooked eggs, but also the smell of decaying vegetation and other decaying matter, often not very pleasant. So in cooked eggs, just a little hint of it, that's fine. The stronger it gets, the less pleasant it gets. Ammonia is up there in outer space. But all these things that are kind of primordial smells are simple molecules, and they're an indication of how it is that the chemical elements, once they're created in the stars and then blown out into space, how they, without any encouragement, simply by their nature, begin to react with each other and form bonds and thereby form molecules. So these primordial smells are some of the earliest molecules that were formed in the history of the universe. Eggs, ammonia, acetone, ozone, the smell of the air after a lightning storm, but also things that might not seem quite so primordial, quite so harsh. Things like esters, which are what the class of chemicals that give fruits their wonderful aromas. So you can find in outer space molecules that have been found as an important part of the aroma of things like raspberries. Amazing, at least to me, mind-boggling. I start there, and then I move to what the Earth would have smelled like before the advent of life, and we can still get hints of that in and around volcanoes and hot springs and places like that. Mineral, volcanic, again, elemental kinds of smells that include ammonia and H2S, but also sulfur dioxide and more obnoxious things. And then I kind of go through the evolution of life on Earth and how the initial forms of life used what was available at the time. And those creatures are still with us in anaerobic, that is to say, limited oxygen areas on planet Earth, including inside us, because eventually microorganisms figured out how to photosynthesize. That led to the release of oxygen gas, and that changed what forms of life could thrive and explore the chemical universe in their evolution. And so I moved from the anaerobic early Earth to the aerobic oxygenized Earth, and then to the creatures that have perfumed the Earth since it became more hospitable to life. And so the plant world, the world of fungi, animals, microbes, bacteria, and so on, all of these realms of life have their own kind of aromatic signatures. And I have to say that of them all, by far, the best are the plants. The plant world has used volatile molecules, the molecules that fly through the air and into our noses so that we can experience them as smells. They've exploited those molecules in a way that that other creatures simply haven't, partly because of their situation. You know, most plants are stuck in the ground in one place. They can't run away. They don't have many options for defending themselves against being eaten by animals that can move around at will. And so in addition to developing thorns and bark and things like that to discourage animals from nibbling, they've also developed these amazing ranges of volatile molecules to signal each other, to repel animals, in some cases to attract animals. That's what fruits and flowers are all about. Their scents are there to make use of mobile animals for the plant's own ends of reproduction. Anyhow, the smells of the plant world are far and away the best. And most of the book is actually devoted to cataloging the amazing sets of molecules that plants have figured out how to make. And then at the very end, I do get to the smells that human beings have chosen to cultivate and to further. So food and drink, of course, because we take natural materials and we subject them to various processes that on the one hand do make them more nourishing. That was probably that's their most important function, but they also turn out to make them much more delicious. And so we pursue particular kinds of aromas and develop them in our various culinary traditions. Same kind of thing when it comes to perfumes and incense, which is, again, human valuing of natural materials specifically for their aromatic properties, as well as whatever other uses they might have. So that just gives you an idea of what the content of the book is. I just say that my purpose in writing the book, and I hope something that readers will find, is simply to get to know this aspect of life that we tend not to pay a whole lot of attention to. If you just stop and realize that the air all around us all the time is filled with these molecules that are telling us something about our surroundings or the things that we're working with. And that pausing and stopping and thinking a little bit about that can be interesting, not just diverting, but can just enrich that moment in a way. And you know, whether you're walking down the street or taking a hike or working at the stove, it's true in all these different places. One of the things I discovered in writing the book is that in Japan, there is a practice of, it has to do with appreciating incense. And it's called the Way of Incense. But another term that's used for this practice is called listening to incense. So what you do is you take a little bit of incense material and you heat it up. You don't really burn it, you just heat it up so that it begins to release its aroma. And then you smell it and you pay attention to it. And then you switch to another one and appreciate it. And then another one. And so you, it's a way of kind of focusing on what it is that these different forms of incense woods have to offer us. And they call this practice listening to incense. And I think it's a wonderful term to think about when thinking about smells. We don't really have the distinction made in smelling between hearing something, hearing a sound, and listening to it, just registering it, but then paying attention to it. So we, most of the time, register smells, but we don't really pay attention to them. We don't really think about what it is that they mean, what it is that they're doing there. And I hope that reading a little bit about what we know about these various realms of our life and our planet can help encourage that kind of attention and make everyday life a little more rich. And I'll just say, because I usually write about food, and this book is mostly not about food, that my favorite example for the magic of aroma is in fact a culinary one. Think about making caramel. So you start with sugar, crystalline sugar, a solid, one molecule, sucrose. The crystals have no color, they have no aroma, they have a sweet taste, and that's it. And simply by applying heat to that material, we change it, we transform it, we change it from a single molecule into thousands of different molecules. Chemists have cataloged many of them, but not all of them. The color changes because some of those molecules have color. The taste changes. It's no longer just sweet. It's also tart and bitter, because acids and bitter compounds are generated by the application of heat. And you end up, of course, with the wonderful aroma of caramel, which fills the kitchen if you're doing it at home. This is all an expression of the amazing versatility of the element carbon, because most of the things that we smell are molecules built up out of carbon. One of my favorite writers on cosmic chemistry calls carbon the hero of chemical evolution, because it's the element that is the best at kind of working with other elements, making new structures simply because it's a gregarious element. It likes to bond with other things. And so what we experience when we cook caramel, that sucrose molecule has 6 carbon atoms in it, and those 6, together with heat and the few other things that are in there, end up generating this wonderful diversity of molecules, some of which we can see and many of which we can smell. And that's what I try to do in the book, is to kind of get at the just this wondrous world of molecules that's all around us all the time, that bears paying attention to. So that's my introduction to the book. And having finished up with a culinary example, maybe I'll invite Dave to join me, and we can chat for a little bit.
Harold, nice to see you. Great lecture as always. I know you well from all the lectures you give, and I love them all. I have a few questions for you. It's fascinating. Asthmacosm. I've never heard of that before. I love it. But it makes me wonder, and you've thought about this, I think, the diversity of molecules that lead to smell. Do you think that the number of molecules that we can smell is fixed in time? Are there new molecules coming into existence that haven't existed before that will lead to new smells?
It's a wonderful question and a very timely one, because it's just been in the last few years that people have begun to use artificial intelligence to try to decode what it is about particular volatile molecules that cause the responses in our olfactory detection system. And it's been a mystery for forever. In fact, as I mentioned, back in the 70s, there were theories, but really no good information. Now we've got lots of information, but in a way, no good theory. What is the underlying principle or principles behind the structure of a particular volatile molecule and the sensation that we have when we detect it? And so just in the last few years, there have been really wonderful strides made in that direction. So far, there's no clear, how shall I say, nice, neat, tidy explanation. You can take many different aspects of a molecule's structure, give them to a computer these days, and the computer can pretty reliably tell you what that molecule is going to smell like. And it is being tested on molecules that do not exist in nature. So chemists can make all kinds of things that we have not encountered in the world. And those molecules can be tested to see whether they have a smell and what they smell like. And so far, some of these AI programs have been able to predict what our reaction to them will be. So I think the olfactory future is very much open. I think the osmocosm is going to grow.
Well, let me ask you a sort of a related question. Just as new molecules may be created, will our smell receptors evolve, do you think, to broaden the osmocosm that we're capable of experiencing?
I guess I would say, and of course I'm not a biologist, so I can't speak with any authority on this, but my guess is that we're very unlikely to evolve new receptors, but perhaps people will develop new receptors that can then be implanted, by which we can experience smells that we have not smelled before. So that, I think, is much more likely. Also, if it happens, it'll happen much more quickly than evolution would be able to give us something new for.
So you mean we might experience it ourselves? We may not have to evolve on our own.
That's right. That's right. Well, I think if it has to evolve, then, even our kids are not going to be able to experience it.
Right, right. I mean, a sort of a related idea is that, you talk about the way we smell, but, if we have cats or dogs or pets or fish, do they smell differently? Do we understand that?
Yeah, they have their own olfactory universes. That's something that people have looked at both for taste and for smell. So, for example, animals that are carnivores generally tend not to have receptors for sweet tastes, because sugars are essentially, how should we say, they're lures that plants produce in order to get us to eat things, in order to get us to eat fruit and thereby spread the seeds around and help them reproduce. Carnivores have no use for that kind of thing, and so they don't even, many of them don't have sweet receptors. Then when it comes to olfaction, it's more complicated for us to understand, because we humans have around 400 different receptors to cover the olfactory space that's important for primates. But different animals have much different repertoires of receptors that have been developed over time, evolved over time to suit the environments that they live in and that they deal with. So yeah, they experience things very differently and often probably more intensely because olfaction is a more important sense for many of them.
So Harold, you talk about these different classes of smell, nature, or plants, or animals, or dirty feet, or all the different things you talk about. Is there some simple way, I like to think about things simply when you think about the science of this. Is there some simple way of characterizing the different molecules that lead to the smell? Did you find that in your research?
Yeah, and I should say also, I'm not a chemist, I'm not a biologist, so part of the motivation for writing this book was actually to educate myself about these things, about these molecules that do play such an important part in our lives that we know so little about. And so finding a way to classify them was really important for me to learn about them and to understand them. And so the way I would put it is at its most basic level, living things are built up out of a very small handful of kinds of molecules, proteins and carbohydrates and fats and nucleic acids like DNA and RNA. These are all very large molecules, and in order to qualify as something you can smell, a molecule has to be small enough that it can escape whatever it's in and fly through the air and into our noses. And it turns out that there are, a variety of different factors that influence whether a molecule is going to do that, but one of them is the size of the molecule. If it's too big, it's not going to fly. And so these macromolecules don't have smells. But when they're broken down or when they're being built up from building blocks, those building blocks and those breakdown products can have smells and often do have smells. And so often when we smell, for example, sweaty feet, what we're smelling is the breakdown products being generated by the microbes that are living on our skin, breaking down the proteins in our skin and releasing these smaller molecules. So that's the thing that really distinguishes the plant world from both microbes and animals. In the case of microbial aromas and animal aromas, usually what we're smelling are breakdown products, the result of microbes living on us, our microbiome on the skin or inside us. In the case of plants, as I mentioned, plants use volatile molecules as signals and as weapons. And so the repertoire that they generate is much broader, much more diverse, and often pleasant because often their purpose is to attract, not to repel. So that's the basic distinction I would make. Small molecules from plants, from microbes and animals, larger, more complex, and more delightful molecules from plants.
So another thing, I know you told me that you talked to a perfumer when you wrote the book, and a perfumer's job is to combine different molecules together to get unique types of smell, unique notes. Did you come up with any way that you can sort of rationalize how perfumery works, how the combination of molecules work to give you some new sensation or some specific sensation? Can you tell us about that?
Well, what I learned studying with Mandy Aftel, who has a wonderful practice and also a museum in Berkeley, California. If you ever happen to be in Berkeley and you're interested in smells, look up Mandy Aftel. But what I learned from her was it's kind of a similar thing with cooks. cooks figured out how to make things work long before they knew any chemistry. Perfumers know how to make things work long before they knew any chemistry, although perfumers have been in the vanguard of understanding the chemistry of volatiles. But their way of breaking things down into molecules that escape from the skin very quickly, or tend to hang around for a little bit longer, or hang around for quite a long time, and in fact hold things on the skin. This base and middle and top note structure that they give to perfumes really does have a chemical basis. And they've understood this long before we knew anything about molecular sizes or anything else. And it's just a wonderful practical way of developing a perfume that has an initial quality, which then evolves to a somewhat different quality, and then to a much longer lasting quality. And by varying the molecules that you choose, or the materials that you choose for those different parts of the overall structure of the smell, you then change both the initial impression, the one that we always get when we sniff a perfume bottle right away, but then how that changes on the skin over the course of time.
And so maybe just one last question to ask you, to bring it back to food and drink, which is your real expertise. You were telling me something I was really impressed by, and you said that you think that it might be possible to tell where whiskey comes from just from the smell. And I wonder if you could explain that and prove that. Maybe we could try one after the talk.
Well, it'll have to be clinking from a distance of 3,000 miles. But
we could do that. We could do that.
Next time we get together.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's so that's a very contentious question these days, especially in the wine world, whether the terroir, the place that a wine is made, somehow leaves an olfactory register in the wine itself. And I guess what I would say from my experience and from what I understand is that it's definitely true that particular products like whiskeys and like wines develop very particular sets of volatile molecules depending on how they're made. And that dependence has to do with the raw materials and then the processes that are used to generate the finished product from those raw materials. And so it's certainly true, for example, that there are house styles of spirits of various kinds. And, you know, if you taste a whiskey, for example, that really reminds you of seaweed or iodine, you know, that kind of smell, you can pretty reliably narrow it down to a particular island in Scotland where peat has been permeated by those smells that have come from the ocean but have been brought to the peat by the rain. I mean, this is the wonderful thing about tracing these things, is that you know, you start with a particular molecule and then you ask, where did it come from? And it can take you from an island in Scotland to the peat to the ocean, probably thousands of miles away. So
thank you, Harold. So Nell, I think there are lots of questions in the question and answer. Do you want to ask them, or can you do that?
Hi, yes, absolutely. Yeah, we have some, I've been having fun reading these. We got some great questions here. So let's see here. To start from the top, we have Sam Birdie, who asks, you say flavor equals taste plus smell, which suggests a mix of molecules that release onto the tongue plus different molecules that diffuse into the air, into the nose. Are there distinct chemical attributes that distinguish between these two groups?
yes, For a molecule to be volatile, it actually has to be a molecule that's not very happy in water. And for a molecule to have taste, it has to be a molecule that's very happy to be in water, because our taste buds are bathed in saliva and our noses are not. And so that's a very basic difference. Now, there are molecules that have smells that can also influence our tongue, and vice versa, but they're relatively rare.
Okay, that's very cool. Thank you. We have a couple of questions from Pilar Quintana. I'll start with her first one. Did you have a chance to compare how other animals use smell as opposed to humans?
I didn't, and I actually don't spend that much time in the book talking about the human experience of smell, because it became clear very early on in this project of mine that the experience of animals, humans included, their response to smells is a very complicated and fascinating subject all on its own. And it would take a book to address that. What I really wanted to do was just say, regardless of your particular ability to smell, what particular receptors you as an individual happen to have thanks to your genetics, whether you're a super taster or not a super taster, these are the molecules that are out there in the world to be experienced. And this is what they're doing there. So that's why I call it a field guide. It really doesn't have much to do at all with our experience of them, so much as to catalog what's out there.
Okay. I feel like this springs fairly well off of that. Vipul Agarwal asks, are there good techniques for hobbyists to collect everyday smells around them for memory keeping? I never would have thought of something like that, and I love this question.
No, it's a great question, and I think we all already have the beginnings of a collection, and that's our spice shelf. Because we use spices for the most part because of the aromas they have, and with the exception maybe of chilies. And that's a great place to start, because these are materials that culinary traditions all over the planet have chosen in their particular climates to focus on and to treasure. And now we have the chance to smell these things from India and South America and Africa. It's fantastic. That's a great start. And if there are other things that you encounter in everyday life, bring a bit of it home with you. And then if you look online, you can find many, many sources of these days, even single molecules. There are hobbyist perfumer and fragrance sites where you can buy small quantities, affordable quantities of these molecules that have been found to be the primary aromatics in various things.
Okay. Thank you. And we have a question from, my apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, Asifa Majid, who asks, apart from the culinary uses of odor, humans in diverse cultures have also developed practices using odors medicinally. Can we understand these uses within the same framework, or does each require different understandings about smell?
That's a very good question, and I recognize the name of the questioner, whose work I have followed and much admire. So thank you very much for coming. And I have to say that I'm simply not qualified to to answer that question. I love to follow what it is that anthropologists and psychologists and others have been working on to try to understand whether, not only do different animals experience smells in different ways, but do different cultures experience smells in different ways. I think that's a really interesting area. But as I say, I was focusing on the stuff that that
itself.
stimulant. Yeah, and so
Mhm.
I really can't answer that question.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. We have, I think this might again be tied more into sort of the sensory rather than the actual stuff itself, but I'm curious if either one of you might have a response to this. Bob Dimkowski, who asks, why do some people find some smells attractive and other people find those same smells just off-putting and offensive?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great and very fundamental question, and it kind of it allows me to just point out the fact that when we experience a smell, what our brain does with that information has to do with what the brain already has in the way of information about that smell.
Mhm.
Has completely to do with the context in which that smell has been encountered. So, you know, the olfactory receptor tells the brain this molecule is in the air around you. If
Mhm.
you associate that molecule with something good, then it's going to be pleasant. If you associate it with something not so good, then it's not. And this probably goes back to, you know, very early evolutionary days when smell was much more important to us as animals. And, you know, it's a way, as I was saying, it's different from sight and hearing. It's a more direct and more sensitive detector for what's going on around us. And so we can smell something if we're, say, living in a savanna and there's a lion downwind or upwind or whichever way it goes, we'll know it's there from the smell. And if that's our environment, then we're going to react to it in a certain way.
Mhm.
So for most of us, that's not an issue anymore. And these days, for most human beings, pleasant smells have to do with the smells that we associate with childhood and, you know, family and things like that, maybe travel these days. Whereas unpleasant smells are going to be the smells of decay or something going off, or you know, the aspects of animal life that we try to suppress as much as possible.
Mhm.
So it really does have to do with context and with experience.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm going to try and combine a couple of questions in one here. And I think this will probably be our last question. But they're both from anonymous attendees. And the general question is, how do you measure or describe what something smells like? And is there anything that you can kind of pull from to access aromas besides, say, your memory? Because one of the questioners is asking because they uh, lost their sense of smell due to COVID, and they've sort of been trying to kind of train that back. Yeah, how do you measure what something smells like? And is there anything other than memory that you can use to access that?
Yeah, again, a wonderful question, um, and we're not there when it comes to good answers for it. So
Mm,
that it's a challenge simply um, to verify the fact that two people are smelling the same thing. You know, you can give them
mm,
one molecule and the two different people will describe them in two different ways. So description and analysis when it comes to smell is difficult because it's not like, you know, red light, blue light, green light. There's no easy way of categorizing apart from the contexts in which we come across things. People are trying to, again, think about that. And Asifa Majid has been working on, for example, the different vocabularies that different cultures use to
mm,
describe particular things. I think we're learning more and more about that. It's certainly the case that it's possible to smell things that you haven't smelled before, and learn about them and register them. And I did that a lot for this book. You know, there were materials, incense materials, for example, perfume materials, like ambergris, you know, the leftovers of a sperm whale that have been floating around in the ocean for.
Right, I was thinking the only
something.
time that I've ever really heard that it's like I'm associating with Melville, but I don't remember why.
Yeah. So there, and that's something I again hope that the book will do is to encourage people to go out and smell things, that search out things to smell that they haven't smelled before, because that's the way you can enlarge your database of smells that you have come across and that you know and that you can associate with a particular thing or experience.
Well, thank you both so much. I think we'll have to leave that there. So thank you, Harold and David, for this conversation, and thanks to all of you for spending your evening with us. Please learn more about this fascinating book. I just reposted the link to purchase copies in the chat. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore and the Harvard Division of Science and the Harvard Library, please have a good night, happy reading, and take care. And once again, thanks so much to both of you. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.